Well, we live in an era that's marked by high-profile showboats in the prosecutor's office, but Attorney General Loretta Lynch has stood out for her quiet tenacity and impressive results. Coming from a long line of Baptist preachers in North Carolina, she's known by her colleagues as steel wrapped in velvet. And she was not only the scourge of mob bosses, corrupt police officers, and sex traffickers, but let's not forget she also managed to bust the boys' club of international soccer, otherwise known as FIFA. I'm very pleased to welcome you, Attorney General. So, today, we just heard that you asked for your name to be removed from consideration to fill the vacancy left by Justice Scalia. It's a bit of a groan there. Was the thought of the confirmation just too ugly?
Well, first let me say, Tina, thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be here. And I also want to say what a tremendous honor it was to be thought of for a position such as the Supreme Court, and how grateful I was for the outpouring of support and thoughts and well wishes of people that I spoke to about this as I traveled the country and as I did my work here, and how much I appreciated everyone's support for this. You know, the nomination process has challenges. Not that it wasn't just delightful when I went through it. And I'm sure it would have been again. But you know, the nomination process has inherent limitations on what you can and can't do, particularly when you're in a policy position. And so I love this job. I am so fulfilled with what I'm doing. And there is so much that I want to push through and cross that goal line before the end of this administration. So I'm committed to staying in the Attorney General position and doing that job to the best of my ability.
Well, in the choosing of a Supreme Court justice now, I mean, you have to be so scrubbed of having any opinion. I mean, you cannot have anything about you that has the criteria of a traceable view. It's the sort of decaffeination of the Supreme Court, right? So is there something almost pernicious about this approach? I mean, are we going to be picking our SCOTUS judges the way we pick jurors now? I mean, do you fear for jurisprudence if we have to have such a process whereby a person has to be literally one of scarcely any records, scarcely any opinions, all of the things that now seem to be thought of as appropriate?
Well, the process certainly has challenges. It does. And I think that we're going to wait and see how this process plays out. The President has indicated he is committed to putting forth an outstanding candidate, and I am certain he will do that. And I hope that that person gets the full and fair consideration that they deserve, because I think the position is just too important to be left unfilled. Mm-hmm.
Of course, you come, as we said earlier, from a long line of Baptist preachers in North Carolina. How did that prepare you for a life prosecuting crime? How did that shape you in your desire to become what you became, which is a very tenacious prosecutor?
So I do come from a long line of Baptist ministers, so you're very brave to have me here at night, you know, open mic, closed room. I could go on forever. But I will, and my younger brother is actually the 5th generation in a direct line of ministers in my family, although the toughest person in my family is my mother. My mother is a retired teacher and librarian. She has seen it all. She has stopped most of it. So those two influences, I think, prepared me for a life of public service and commitment, and a view that you can do a lot for yourself if you're doing something for someone else.
And did you experience yourself personally any racism in your rise, and indeed any sexism in your rise, you know, battling your way to the top of your profession?
I think if you talk to any number of us, particularly women lawyers of my generation, who came out of law school in the 80s, and we went to Wall Street and were working hard, and then I was privileged to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the early 90s. But in those days, we will all have a very similar story of walking into the deposition and people think you're the court reporter, or walking into the meeting and people think that you're the assistant and not the associate, on a case. So you'll hear that from a lot of women in my generation, because it was still sort of new. I remember being a young summer associate at a really great law firm in North Carolina when I was in law school, and I was doing a presentation. The partner was really trying to make us interact with clients and provide our input, and I myself and one other summer associate, and I'm giving my presentation and talking about why this particular business venture will or won't work, and the client is looking directly at the male summer associate the whole time and never acknowledges me. But you know, it's part of the fact that law is a reactive field. You know, we respond to complaints, we respond to clients, and so I think that's taken the law a long time to sort of get caught up with where things are. But now, you know, women are over a majority in law schools. Mm-hmm. They are over a majority in entering classes in law firms. When I look at, even as my career as a prosecutor, when I was a young prosecutor in the 90s, agents would come to my office, and I was in Brooklyn, and we had a reputation, and they would say, you know, the women here are a lot tougher than the guys. You know, when I was a narcotics prosecutor in particular, they would say, when we hear who has our case, you know, we wanted to be, you know, one of you young women here, and then we hear about the guys. We're like, oh, okay, but are they as tough as Loretta? Are they as tough as Rona? Are they as tough as Beryl? You know?
Well, in that U.S. Attorney's Office, you had a very defining case when you helped lead the team to prosecute the brutal assault, including sodomy, of the Haitian immigrant Abner Louima in 1997 by uniformed New York police officers in the police station, no less. What did you learn from that case? Because, of course, today there's so much, we're hearing so much about police brutality, you know, in different spheres. But in that Abner Louima case, what did you learn in that case as you prosecuted?
Challenging case. I think all cases are challenging when they involve different types of evidence. We had witness testimony, we had DNA, we had a victim who told a very, very compelling story. But, you know, I think whenever you have a case involving law enforcement, it's difficult because people want to trust in law enforcement. They want to believe them. The biggest hurdle we had just in getting the case together initially was the view of disbelief on so many people's parts that how could this happen? And they really weren't necessarily they weren't trying to avoid the issue. It really was literally disbelief. How could uniformed police officers not only beat a man badly on the street in a police car, but then take him to a police precinct, take him to a bathroom, pull down his pants, and use a broom handle and literally tear him apart. And so that level of disbelief we had to overcome in the first instance. And you know, in those days, we did not have the cell phone videos that you have now. We did not have the neighbor on the street who happened to be watching. We didn't even have the Rodney King video. You know, we had a victim who told a story. And frankly, because he was so badly injured, we were able to overcome a lot of that hurdle. And then we had an obstruction part of the case also, because after the crime was committed, there was a cover-up. And trying to piece together, again, the view that people have, that trust that they want to have, that they should be able to have in law enforcement, that they're going to protect you and serve you. Instead, this particular group of law enforcement were protecting themselves. But I saw such tremendous acts of courage. First and foremost, our victim, Abner Louima, went through hell, literally, and yet always told his story calmly, clearly, consistently, and was very credible for it. And then the number of police officers who came forward and testified, they weren't happy about it, but you know, we would sit in a room and talk with them, and you could see the struggle on their faces. It's a lot to overcome, and to have them say, "This is not why I became a cop, to condone this kind of behavior," you know, and to see that kind of courage also on display at the same time as some other cops that we knew had information would refuse to talk to us, absolutely refuse to talk to us. So I think we saw the gamut of reactions in that case. And it really underscores how hard they are because of the emotions that they engender in everyone.
Well, absolutely, but it's also that sense of disbelief, as you say, which now the video cameras are allowing us a peephole now into seeing some of the things that we've heard, but never really, a lot of people did not believe. We're seeing that again. So another major source of your focus was prosecuting sex traffickers, correct? And with more than 55 indictments you had, including pimps outside the United States. what are the most difficult challenges you face when prosecuting sex trafficking cases? Because I know it is a very big interest you have.
It is. It's one of my priorities as Attorney General also. And my interest in that does stem from my work in Brooklyn and the cases that I saw, both international sex trafficking, forced labor, as well as the domestic sex trafficking, usually of runaways who were caught up by people they thought they could trust, and then, of course, turned out that they could not. It's the trauma that it does to victims. I think human trafficking is one of the most invisible yet pernicious crimes that is out there now. Many people have seen victims of human trafficking and just don't know that's what they're looking at. And so it's been very, very challenging. In particular, watching the psychological torture of the women who were victims. One of the hallmarks of the series of cases we did in Brooklyn that involved men from Mexico, a particular village in Mexico, who would essentially meet young women and lure them into their families, really, with a promise of love and commitment. And then they would say, we're going to go to America and make our fortune. And then when they would get to the New York area, of course, they're told, you have to make money for me. And people often wonder, how do you keep someone subjugated in a country as big as ours? You know, when you could literally walk out the door, you could run away. And people will often ask, and in those types of cases in particular, they use their children against them. Many of the young women either had children on their own or they had children with the traffickers. And the children are left behind in Mexico while they came to the New York area. And they were told, if you don't continue this life of forced prostitution, we will either kill your children or you'll never see them again. And you know, women will do anything to protect their children. That's how you control women, is through their children and through their extended family and the people that we love. And so also seeing that, because women in this situation often have a language barrier and a cultural barrier, the way that we often find the victims is not necessarily through law enforcement, but through other survivors organizations, through foundations and charities that recognize victims, that reach out to them, and then bring them to us. So building the partnership between law enforcement, the NGO community, and the survivor community is key. And it's the paradigm that we're using as we move forward in our human trafficking investigations now. And I was tremendously proud of the fact that we were able to reunite several victims with their children, including some who've been kept away from their families for over 10 years. And the children had been told, your mother doesn't love you, she left you. She doesn't care anything about you. And we were able to work with lawyers and families in Mexico, the Mexican government, NGO organizations, and the women to reunite those families.
So now you're in the DOJ's office. How are you going to amplify and augment those efforts? Because also the internet has become such a powerful tool for sex trafficking.
It is. We're working on those types of cases also. And the benefit of being in the Attorney General's chair is I get to direct the resources of the Department of Justice and amplify efforts just like that. So one of the things we're doing is we have a team partnership with law enforcement, with Department of Labor, for example, because they get a lot of information about forced labor cases, and our state and local law enforcement partners. And where we have these partnerships, these teams, we've seen the numbers of cases of human trafficking go up over 100% in a few years, and we're expanding that effort. Through the department's grant-making processes, we've been awarding money to the NGOs and state and locals that are doing this work. And the main thing is that it has to be victim-centered. You know, your focus has to start with the victim, recognizing a victim, learning how to talk to a victim, learning how to provide those essential services that will give that person a bridge from what is literally modern-day slavery back into the modern-day world. And that's a very different paradigm for law enforcement, but they are committed to it as well.
Well, there's been a string of DOJ investigations as well across the country under Attorney General Holder, actually, who found cases of violence against women were under-investigated and mishandled. How much, is that a focus of yours too? Because I found that a very interesting fact that so many of these cases were under-investigated or mishandled. How much of that is incompetence and how much of that is just simply blatant disregard of women?
Actually, I think a lot of it is not knowing what to look for. And we spend a lot of time training law enforcement in how to recognize not just trafficking victims, but domestic violence victims as well, particularly where there are language barriers and cultural barriers. And we actually just recently released some guidance on how to eliminate gender bias in policing, and it's directed at helping law enforcement learn how to deal with domestic violence victims, including not just women, but also the LGBTQ community, because that community is very, very often victimized by domestic partners, and their voice has been muffled for far too long. Because of a whole host of their types of interactions with law enforcement in the past. So helping law enforcement recognize the victimology there and know how to handle it in a supportive way. And so our model is, whether it's human trafficking involving women, children, again, LGBT community, is even if we cannot build a law enforcement case right now, we will rescue the victim first. Even if they're too traumatized to testify or give us information, we will focus on that victim first. Because ultimately, they may be able to help us build a larger case down the road. And even if they can't, we will learn what we can from their situation and use it to help other victims.
Right. It's very slow and patient work, I can imagine. Let's just turn to some of the other aspects of that early career of yours, which of course was cracking down as well on terrorists, right? And now, of course, we're in the very complicated issue of Apple, which is consuming, a lot of attention now. And you're asking Apple to write a software that undermines its own prime product. So that's never been done before. How can you expect them to do that? Why would you think they would comply with that?
Well, I think the way this case started is interesting, and everyone knows about the San Bernardino case and the roots thereof. But this actually began with a request from the customer for Apple to help us. The owner of the phone is the county that employed one of the terrorists who's now deceased. And they are the customer here. They own the phone. They went to Apple and said, as your customer, will you help us? We need to essentially provide a way for the government to try and get into this phone. And by the way, we're not asking Apple to go into the phone and extract anything or, in fact, break into the phone. What we're saying is disable the password destruct feature that would wipe the phone clean. We will then try and guess the password with our systems. We will then try and extract the data. We're not asking them to do anything beyond that. And we also don't want them to give us what they use to disable the password feature. This is something that they can do, and we hope that they will ultimately acquiesce to the customer's request and do it. And I think part of the issue here is again, it's privacy is clearly very important here. It's important to all of us, as it should be. It's important to the Department of Justice as an institution. It's important to me as the Attorney General. But we have always looked to our legal system to balance the very, very important privacy interests that we all have with the law enforcement needs that we also have as a society. And so we've been balancing this for years. It's not that unusual a request.
No, but the problem is that there are other missions, and even within other aspects of the administration, we're hearing these different voices. Because we heard Ash Carter, for instance, say that encryption is absolutely essential to the Pentagon, and that a law written in an atmosphere of anger or grief is not likely to be the right answer. So how does this get resolved? Because there are so many different factors at play. And in a way, these issues now have such an international component to them, which they didn't have in the past. And there are so many different agendas, in a sense. And since the post-Snowden world, it's almost as if like the FBI is paying the price of the NASA, NASA overreach.
And that may be, those reactions do occur, and I can understand that. And I think Ash is right, encryption is important. We all use encryption, and we want strong encryption. I think what's been interesting about this debate, as I've talked about it to a number of groups, is that people sort of view it as, this phone is completely locked, and that it's all or nothing. But the reality is we all use encryption in so many different ways. If you were to go to your bank and say, I need to look at something that happened in last month's statement, you want them to protect your data. But if they were to say to you, oh, Tina, I'm so sorry, you gave us that information, but now it's encrypted and no one can get to it, and therefore you can't use it, you would be surprised at that. If you went to your doctor and said, we're going to have another MRI, let's look at the one from last year, and he said, yeah, I've got that on file, but it's encrypted. So we want that protection. We need that protection for sensitive information. Those are the two most common in terms of personal information: our healthcare information, our financial information, our government information. But companies use data all the time, and they find ways to protect it. You know, it is really a part of life. So it's been an interesting part of the debate that it's been defined as, you know, once this information on the phone goes into a black box, it's perfectly okay that it never comes out again. When the reality is, we all protect our data, and then we all find a way to use it in a way that helps us, but keeps it from the eyes of other people. So that balance has been done for years by all kinds of companies and by all kinds of people. So we're asking that it be applied here through a legal process, that again, if they don't want to acquiesce to the customer's request, we've gotten a court order that says we have probable cause to believe there may be information on this phone. We don't know, but we have an obligation as part of this investigation to leave no stone unturned. And that is, quite frankly, what I hear when I travel this country and I talk to people about any case at all. The idea that there would be evidence sitting somewhere and we would say, you know, it's just too hard for us to get into it, is not something that I can say to anyone who's been the victim of a crime. And so we go to court, we have a neutral third party look at this issue, and the law has said for years, again, if a third party can help, they can be required to help. But we'll see where this goes.
We'll see where it goes, because the complexities are really intense. And I must say, strongly felt in favor of the law enforcement angle until I began to understand all the ramifications of these, the international ramifications of it, and the sense that perhaps in the writing of this software, you could wind up in the hands of an Edward Snowden on the team. What happens then? There are many, many questions involved that are really more complex than simply the law enforcement mission as I see it.
Well, I think we deal with those every day as well as also. You know, we're talking about those with our foreign counterparts. Companies are dealing with this every day. I think everyone is really working very hard on this issue. And I think it's something that I hope that this debate over the case that's going on now doesn't obscure the fact that the technology companies very, very much want to work on this issue. I'm not presupposing what their answer is going to be, but they're not sitting back and saying we support terrorism. That isn't what they're saying. They're struggling with this issue also, as are we in government.
Let me just turn to the other issue that, of course, is consuming people so much in this election year, that there's almost no issue in this climate of partisan rancor that doesn't get politicized and polarized, and clearly one of the most contentious is the question of Hillary Clinton's email. And it's putting voters really in a difficult spot, because doesn't the public really deserve to know the results of your investigation one way or another before they vote? It's like this smoking gun that's out there, for the Democratic candidate, and she's winning state after state, and and she's progressing towards perhaps the nomination, and yet there is the smoking bomb, and we keep hearing this could explode. Don't we deserve to know?
Well, I think that certainly the American people deserve to have the Department of Justice conduct every case the same way we do all of them, thoroughly, efficiently, fairly, and independently. At the outset, no matter who's involved, no matter whose name is involved or attached to it, and that's what we do. So we don't change our way of dealing. We don't change the way we operate because one of the names is more recognizable than any of the others that may or may not be in there. And so, as I've said before, this case is being handled like any other. It's being reviewed by career independent agents and lawyers in the Department of Justice. They follow the facts, they look at the law, and they come to a decision.
Right, I understand. But if you conclude that no criminal charges are warranted, do you believe that the Justice Department also owes the public a full report on what the FBI found and why it reached the conclusions that it did? In this instance, should we now get the full exposure to the report?
Well, we don't talk about ongoing investigations, so I'm not able to go into, oh yes, this is what happened yesterday or a month ago or whatever. We don't talk about ongoing investigations in any case. And we're not going to change our policies again because of the name of one of the people who may be connected to this one. And so essentially it depends on what we find. It really depends on what we find as to how we put information out.
And what do you see as the time frame on that?
We don't give a time frame.
Well, that is very frustrating for us all.
It is. Look, I know that it's frustrating. I know that it is. But I think that, frankly, the way that the Department of Justice does its work and does its work best, and we maintain, frankly, our position as the independent arbiter and the independent voice looking at these, is to treat every case the same. is to essentially make sure that we are as careful as can be in every matter. And that we don't change our policies or procedures because of the way either the political winds or the winds of public opinion are blowing, because that's not effective, and that is actually not helpful to the American people, because then they would never have faith in a result that we reached.
Yeah. Well, another major priority of the president has been the closing of Guantanamo Bay, and it was just reported that 12 inmates released from Guantanamo Bay are now fighting as militants. And last month, the president announced a plan to transfer nearly 36 Guantanamo detainees to other countries and then transfer the rest to the United States. Is that legal or feasible in this political climate? It just seems it's such a partisan environment out there. You know, how are we going to now close Guantanamo Bay? And if we do, where do we put these people? Mm-hmm. It's almost as if now what happens if we get, you know, the leader of ISIS, al-Bakr, where are we going to put him? You know, it's almost as if we're motivated to kill them rather than capture them because we don't have anywhere to put them.
Well, I don't think that we don't make the decision as to whether or not someone should be killed or not, whether we have space for them. Yeah. That would not be appropriate in any sense.
Sometimes it feels that way right now. It's like
you can't just say we're full and so
no
therefore
place to put them.
Yeah, that would be inappropriate under all reviews.
I was sort of hoping you would just agree, and then it would be.
No, that's not the criteria at all. Well, you know, the president did provide a plan to Congress just a few weeks ago about how to close Guantanamo Bay. And as has been going on now, both through this administration and the prior administration, there's a review of individuals to determine whether or not they can be released to countries that can deal with them. And so that process is ongoing, and individuals are being released in that regard. But for the number of individuals who may not qualify, that irreducible few that we may be left with, the president has indicated that he intends to work with Congress to determine how they can be brought to the U.S. if that can happen. Current law does not allow that. You know, the current law, in terms of funding for a number of agencies and very specific statutes, doesn't allow that. And so he's indicated he wants to work with Congress on that issue.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, when I spoke with former Attorney General Eric Holder very recently at our Justice Summit, he said that he was mad then and mad now that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, for instance, wasn't tried in a New York court because politics intervened. And we just saw there was such kind of frenzy, you know, even at the thought of bringing, you know, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed back here for a trial. It seems very unlikely that we'll be able to bring these people back to the United States.
You know, I can't speculate on what's going to happen with those discussions between the president and Congress, but I know that he does intend to have that dialogue and essentially will try and come to a resolution with them on that issue, because there would have to be a change of law. I would note that in many instances, you know, what we're now seeing in terms of the change of the nature of the terrorist threat against this country, which is still there, the shift from the large-scale 9/11 type planning to the individual homegrown extremist, often American citizens, often people who've grown up in the U.S. and who are converted online to a very, very radical brand of violent extremism. And those individuals are dealt with by the U.S. courts every day.
Yeah, like David Headley.
And others, yes.
Well, of course, you know, this term of yours of Attorney General, you have a year, unless, of course, there's a Democratic president who reconfirms you if you so desire, and they so desire. So you have, what, 8, 9 months. What do you want your legacy to be? What do you think you can achieve in this term now that you have as Attorney General?
You know, I want to continue to shine a light on the issue of the vulnerable victims in this country, particularly the victims of human trafficking. Obviously, national security, terrorism, those will continue to be a focus of the department. I also have spent a great deal of time working on the issue of the breakdown in the relationship between law enforcement and the communities that we serve.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you sued Ferguson, and they're still bulking, right, aren't they, at the reforms that you've mandated? Is that going to be a focus for you, as you say, to try to rebuild these frayed relationships, and how are you going to go about it?
Ferguson is a case where we were very hopeful that we would be able to implement what we thought was a very fair and a very effective consent decree with the city. And I think they're going to review it again. And hopefully they'll come to a resolution that will allow us to move forward quickly and bring some real reform and change there. That would be the best result. Otherwise, we do have a litigation against them, and so that would proceed. We would proceed in court, and I'm convinced that we would prevail in court. And so that's actually one of the more extreme cases we have. One of the things that I think has been very productive has been the fact that a number of law enforcement agencies will reach out directly to the Department of Justice and request help from us. They request technical assistance. They request use of force training. They will say, you know, we don't have the best training in this area, and we don't want to have a flashpoint incident like Ferguson or like others. And so we do a lot of that through our grant-making program, through our community-oriented policing office, and so we're doing it that way as well. I have been on a community policing tour, 6 cities in 2015, 6 more this year, focusing on communities that have had a negative relationship between law enforcement and the community, and yet they have sat down together and made a concerted decision and a conscious effort and done the hard work to improve that relationship. So we're highlighting those situations as well. And so I think it can be done because I've seen it done. I've seen that relationship crash and burn, and I've seen people work to rebuild it, and it takes everyone's commitment, law enforcement, community, elected officials, local leaders, young people, everyone essentially getting everything out on the table and deciding that what holds them together is greater than what's going to tear them apart, and working to rebuild that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Attorney General Lynch. We have so much to talk about.
Thank you.
And it's been great.
Thank you. Thank you all.